sometimes just giving yourself enough space and time to explore something fully can enable you to truly understand what works and what doesn't, versus kind of like flicking through different projects. It's difficult to get any form of depth or validation upon whether this project is meaningful to you or not. The way that my brain works is that I have like these screaming kids who are shouting at me for attention, right? And until I look at them and go like, I heard you, they're going to keep coming at me.
On today's episode, Mark Leruste, author, speaker, leadership coach, and the host of Unconventionalists. Mark, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm very excited to have this conversation with you because you seem to be a very purpose-driven person. And the reason why I started this podcast is actually to, in a way, live out my own purpose. In a way, raise awareness, I guess, in people's minds as to importance of finding their own purpose, and to find out other amazing people's journeys, such as yourself, in discovering their relationship with that word. So from doing my research, I know
I got a clipboard and I'm very
got the
impressed.
clipboard, got everything. So I know that your purpose is to eradicate career misery in the workplace by connecting people to their own purpose. So my question to you is, how much time did it take you to define that for yourself?
Well, it's actually changed since then. It's one of the things I talk about, how purpose evolves and it's an organic matter.
That was going to be the follow-up question. Is that still it for you?
Yeah, no. So really, like if I had to boil it down, my purpose in life is to normalize the human condition. That's kind of what really resonates with me.
What does that mean?
It means to enable others to feel seen, heard, and loved in some way, shape, or form. And it sounds like some kind of fluffy words thrown out, especially when I do work in the corporate world. But I think it's my ability to talk about meaningful topics or deep or difficult topics and do it in a way that can be light and fun as well. And it kind of normalizes the human condition, if you want. So it enables people to feel less alone because it feels like, oh, somebody else is talking about these things that I struggle with, or to normalize the conversation around shame, stigma, and so forth. And that feeds very well into my book, right? Which is all around how to take ownership of your story and take back the narrative of your story so you can no longer be driven by it, but you actually back in the driving seat. So it's evolved. When I used to do a lot of work in the corporate world, that was kind of like my statement. I'd come on stage and I'd say, my mission in life is to eradicate career misery in the workplace. And I actually used to follow that by saying, and the reason why I want to do that is because I want to help create organizations and shape leaders where I know that if something happened to me, my kids would be able to work in organizations that would take care of them.
And that's a very powerful statement. That resonated with me. That made a lot of sense. And the way that you phrased it, which is what it is, why it is, and how you're doing it, it's a perfect circle, right? So it can land in people's hearts and minds very clearly. So that's, I guess, what makes you a very great storyteller and why you wrote the book that you did.
Yeah. I mean, at least I love a good story. And again, I think it takes time, like if you read my first book, It's Not You, It's Me, that was very much about my journey of going from like the corporate world and being what I call like a corporate dropout, kind of leaving that world and exploring what values meant and what does it mean to find a company that has a good fit for who you are and how you want to show up in the world, enables you to also express yourself. Like it was just all these little things. So it's a long journey. Like we're now 2023 at the time of this recording. That little particular episode of A Meltdown was 2009. So, 14 years of a journey. So it's easy to kind of look at some of the sound bites that I kind of now share and talk about why I do what I do and go, oh, that feels easy, but it's taken a while and it doesn't need to. It doesn't have to take you that long, but I think it's worth the pursuit.
So interesting to ponder upon the fact that it seems that the journey is really always evolving. So this podcast is called Is This It? And that kind of is a tribute to that ever ongoing journey. So what might be it at the moment most probably won't be it in 4 years' time when I look back at it.
Definitely.
So it's very interesting to hear about how your purpose has evolved as well and how you're redefining it. Is that something that you do on a regular basis?
No, I don't think it's necessary. I mean, I spend probably too much time like overthinking about, how do I phrase or package it, especially in the kind of the work that I'm in. So I predominantly go and talk in organizations and conferences, so Fortune 500 companies and global conferences, but also coach and mentor entrepreneurs and business leaders, part of the program. So in that space, I kind of need to be able to explain what I do so people get it. But then, you've got a different element, which I think is, if you think about it as a flower, right? Like think about the heart of the flower, like a sunflower, okay? And you've got petals around it. What I found is that when you sort of get even a vague idea of what the core purpose is, like of that central circle of the sunflower, the petals are different ways you can express it. So this podcast is one way for you to express it, but maybe writing a book's another one, maybe going and giving talks another, maybe coaching someone's another one, maybe exercising.
You named them all.
Yeah, but you see what I'm saying? So it's kind of like sometimes people get caught up on like the petal rather than the heart of the flower, if that makes sense. So
It does.
what I found is, my core is like, normalize the human condition so that we can all feel seen, heard, and loved. It can feel to somebody, it doesn't really matter how it sounds almost to somebody else, because I don't really share that necessarily publicly. This is just like, I know that that's what drives me, but then I can express it in different ways. So for example, Glow in the Dark, the book I just wrote, it's a passion project that I've had for a long time to try and unlock the power of everyone's story and to see how like worthy and valuable your story is. So at the moment, my mission is to help entrepreneurs and business leaders impact the world with their story. That's kind of what I'm focusing my time and energy and attention on. Will it be forever? I don't know. Most likely not. I might shift at some point to something else. But for now, that feels valuable to me. And I think a big challenge that I find when I hear people asking me, like, how do I find my purpose? Or whatever it is that it can be hard to stick to something when it feels uncomfortable. And sometimes just giving yourself enough space and time to explore something fully can enable you to truly understand what works and what doesn't, versus kind of like flicking through different projects. It's difficult to get any form of depth or validation upon whether this project is meaningful to you or not. And I'm not saying you should, there's a thin line between, jumping too quickly and staying for too long, right? We can see that in relationships, we can see that in work. But I think there is something worth in saying that I, as someone who's got quite a kind of a creative brain, and, I'm a dyslexic thinker, and I've probably got some form of ADHD of some shape or form. So it's really easy for me to get distracted and to want to jump on the next project. So I have to find a way to hone that in. And the way that I hone that in is that for the next 12 months, I'm going to dedicate my time, energy, and attention to helping people unpack, own, and share their stories so the world listens. That's kind of what gives me a little bit, almost like if you've ever seen horses with blinds on the side of their eyes, kind of help them focus. It's almost that I need to do. And then in 12 months, I'll reassess. So next year, if I jump back on the podcast, ask me the same question, it might be the same, it might have changed.
It's very, very interesting. From somebody that has a bit of inclination to ADHD, how do you then narrow it down further? Because, okay, that's what you want to do, but then there are about 100 petals that you can do that with. What's your system to going further?
It's a good question. So I have almost like, if you call it like a creative project jar, if you want. So the way that my brain works, and I try to explain this to my partner, is that I have like these screaming kids who are shouting at me for attention, right? And until I look at them and go like, I heard you, they're going to keep coming at me. And so that can come in the shape or form of so many different projects. It could be like, I want to do a new show reel. I want to do a new podcast about this topic. I want to write this new book. And so all these kind of ideas. So what I do is I usually allow myself a space to just write everything down. And the process of writing it down and capturing it in some way almost quietens that voice. And then I can really sit with like...
Downloads the mind.
Yeah, a little bit. I call it a mind dump, basically. It's a mind dump. So I use this exercise with clients, but I use this exercise myself a lot. It's this idea that you clear the mind of all the stuff that's in your head. And then I can look at it and go, okay, I could do this, but maybe not right now. And so just have this idea that I can always come back to it if I want to. And I've got a list of projects. And sometimes every once in a few months, I'll look at that list and I'll say, actually, that
was a crazy idea. Yeah, let's leave it.
Yeah, or it's almost like, okay, so I'm going on a complete left field, but Marie Kondo's book, right? The life-changing magic of tidying up, whatever it is. So I read that book, and there's something really interesting that spoke to me in that book, which is this idea that you're holding on to these items of clothing that you're not wearing, but somebody else could enjoy, right? Like this concept of you're holding on to this thing that you're not even enjoying, this poor piece of clothing, if you go into this kind of like down the line, like closing your feelings, right? But like this like piece of item isn't getting to fulfill its purpose of being worn and being, loved and all this stuff. So why are you holding on to it? Just give it to somebody else who would need it. And so I think sometimes like that about my ideas. I'm like, I think it's an idea, I'd love to do it, but maybe it's best for someone else to do it.
So is there a place that you just post all of your ideas?
Well, no, but I've actually thought about this. I've got lists of like business ideas or creative projects that I have. And I think at one point I'm just going to post them on the blog and just go, hey, if you're looking for some creative ideas, I'd love to see these being implemented. Take it, use it, run with it. It's a weird thing, I think, where you kind of realize like I just don't have the time and bandwidth to do all the things
None
I
of
would
us
love
do.
to do. No. And I think that can get in the way almost of appreciating the moment or being in the present moment and doing whatever task or project or mission you're on, because you keep on thinking about all the things. But, you know, my podcast, The Unconventionalists, I've interviewed now probably 150, you know, kind of high performers in different industries, from politics and athletes, CEOs and influencers, all that kind of stuff. And sure, there are some examples that you could find where they've got some form of different, you know, hands in different pots, but most of them have been really good at staying on course and just doing something just really well. There's a great quote from David Hewett, who's the founder of the Do Lectures and Hewett Denim, and he talks about like, do one thing, it's enough. And I've got that actually in my office, and my backdrop of my office, it's written in big bold, like, do one thing, it's enough. Do one thing well, it's enough. Sorry. And I know it's hard, especially with.
Do you apply that overall, thinking about your life, about your year, about your day, or
no? I think it's more about like what the kind of work I want to put out into the world, more like that, because variety is the spice of life, right? And I think I do enjoy some form of variety. I mean, my partner are quite different in that way. Like, we'll sit at a restaurant, or we'll maybe order something, and she'll be able to like order the same thing every time and love it. And I always try new things, and you got a good 6 out of 10 chance it's going to suck and it's not going to be that good, but maybe that one time you're going to find something that's really cool. And so I kind of approach more like that. But I think for my work, so up until recently, I was doing a lot of work around purpose, right? So a lot of companies, organizations were bringing me in to talk about how to find meaning and purpose at work, whether that's for a brand, like how do you unleash the power of purpose in your brand? You know, why do purpose-driven companies do better and matter more? Like all this kind of stuff. And then I decided to write a book about storytelling, personal storytelling, and why we all have a story worth sharing, and the value for both ourselves from a healing perspective, but also for others and for your business and impact and all that stuff. And for that to happen, I had to park purpose. Like I had to park this concept of I'm going to be focusing my work and attention on purpose, and now shifting to story. So I still get caught in old patterns where I get people asking me like, how should I introduce you? Right? Like on the podcast, and I still put like Mark helps clients find their purpose and all this kind of stuff. But now I've kind of gone back to just say, you know, Mark's on a mission to help entrepreneurs and business leaders impact the world with their story. And I just have to stay with that. And it's uncomfortable because I really want to shout, but there's so much more I want to do. There's so much more I've got to offer. But the metaphor I use for people to kind of wrap their minds around it is, if you go shopping, you know, hopefully some of us are still going shopping in the high streets and supporting independent local stores and all that stuff. But you get to the window, right? And most likely you're going to see a mannequin. And on that mannequin, you're going to see a few curated items, enough to make you interested to find out what's inside, right? Imagine if the shop put all their stock in the front window. It'd be really overwhelming, right? You'd be like, this looks like a mess. They do what? Like they do books, but they also do belts, and they'll, as opposed to having this nice curated kind of, you know, window shop where you can go, that sounds interesting and exciting, let me find out more. And you go inside and then you realize they've got so much more to offer. That's something that takes practice, but actually pays off, I think, tenfold, because you simplify the process for people to understand what you're about in the world, which I think is half the battle, you know, especially when I look at a lot of people in our space, I guess, in the kind of the thought leadership space and podcasting, speakers, coaches, all that kind of stuff. I think a lot of jargon is being used, or words that don't actually make a lot of sense to people. And they want to say like there are 15 different job titles on their LinkedIn profile or maybe their Instagram bio. Whereas I think if you can have the courage to just stick in a lane and just really believe that you can make an impact and a dent, and that's enough, without needing to spread yourself in everything to feel like you're going to matter, I think, again, you won half the battle.
You know, you touch upon such an important and crucial point. And as you said, a lot of people in the industry, right? Coaches, anyone that wants to help people, right? In the beginning of the journey, if you have a mentor or a coach, as a coach, they'll tell you, okay, well, you have to niche down. You have to find your audience. Who are you going to help?
The riches are in the niches, they used to say. But can I just clarify something real quick? For everybody listening, it's pronounced niche, not niche.
Who says niche? It's niche.
No, but like a lot of Americans say niche. And the reason why it's niche, and I'll explain if you don't mind just for a second, it's a French word, because I'm half French. It's a French word. And I think it's pretty cool. So back in the olden days when they had like oil lamps, the way that they spread the most light in a room, where they used to have these holes in the wall, and they were called niches. So you would put a lamp into this little kind of almost hole in the wall that would spread the most light. So the idea of niching is actually, even though it feels like you're really narrowing down, you're actually spreading the most light possible. Just so I'd give that little caveat.
Mic drop. Right there. Thank you for sharing that. I didn't know that.
Yeah, no worries.
So yeah, going back to coaches, right? And the first thing that any person will tell you, no, I want to help everyone. I cannot. What are you talking about? I want to help these people, all people that can be helped. I want to help them. Yeah. So how to find that strength to cancel everyone else and be like, okay, no, I'm just gonna try and help this little group.
So okay, well, there's 10 ways I could unfold this one. But okay, first, number one, I would say that it comes from a good place. So it comes from a good place, and it comes from a place of fear. So I'm just going to separate those two real quick. It comes from a good place because you want to try and help as many people as possible. So if you're basically told, look, you can, in people's mind, it's like you can help 1 million people, you can help really well like 100 or 1,000 people, right? That can feel scary. It can feel like I'm not fulfilling my full potential, because what I really want is to impact millions of people's lives, and I want to be Tony Robbins, and all this kind of stuff. But it also comes from a place of fear. It comes from a place of fear, deeply rooted around the idea that if I do niche down, then I will lose out, right? So it's kind of like, why would I not try and go for like this 1 million population versus like this 1,000 or 10,000 niche? And in that fear, there's a process involved around this fear of commitment. What if I'm not 100% sure it's the right niche? What if I niche down and then I can't get out of it and I'm stuck into this? What if I say yes to this? That means I have to say no to all of that. That's right. So once you kind of get really clear and get a bit of self-awareness on that, it's a normal pattern. It happens to every coach, every speaker when they begin. But then you've got to understand, what's your objective. Okay. So if your objective is to have a hobby and just something you do on the side that you don't want to take real seriously, you don't want to build it into a business or something that's going to sustain, then that's fine. Do whatever you want. If you want to coach people, then do that. But if you want to try and build a sustainable revenue generating business, then you're going to have to niche down, because if you don't, the market's going to be confused as to what you're about and what problem you solve for them. Because what people don't understand is that when it comes down to, whether that's sharing your story or enrolling people through storytelling, the end goal should be to try and make it clear that you understand their pain and you understand what they're going through, and you can position yourself as someone who has compassion, empathy, but also credibility and authority. So not only can you tell them like, look, I get what you're going through, but also like, I've got a plan. Like, I know how to get you out of this. I've helped other people get out of this, or I've been out through this. And the truth of the matter is, I'll give you an example. If I tried to talk to a market, let's say for whatever reason I was starting a new coaching business, right? And I wanted to speak to mums, right? I was going to talk to mums about the challenges of
postpartum depression.
Yeah, right, exactly. I can read about it. I can hear people's stories about it, but am I going to be as efficient and as powerful and as helpful as someone who's actually been through that, who's actually helped many women go through that? Probably not. But I can tell you with intimate detail what it feels like to be a dad. And I can tell you what it feels like to be a dad when you run a business, when you have young kids and you're trying to build a business at the same time. The stresses, the strains, the fears, like I can talk about that in a way that when people read that, they go, oh my God, that's me. He understands me. And so really niching down is a better way of saying, I see you and I'm here to help. And the last thing I'll say if that helps people is what I've found, which is weird. Think about your almost like your niche is like your ideal target market. Okay. So when I used to work with coaches and speakers and that kind of stuff to try and build their business, this is many moons ago. One of the things I would say really quickly is like, can you think about a particular client who you worked with who was just amazing? And usually most people who've been in business for a little while, or maybe even have just started off, will have a general idea like, oh yeah, there's this one person. And I'm like, cool, tell me more about them.
And they're like them.
Well, often they have a lot of similarities, but what the reason why I'll do that exercise is that they'll distill some of the values that this client represents for them, right? So it might be someone who's really driven, they show up, they pay on time, they don't haggle with the prices, they're grateful, they've got a good heart, like whatever the defining moments are. And then I would say, cool. How would you love being able to multiply that client? I'd be like, oh my God, that'd be amazing. What if you could have like a business with like it's very difficult to get 100%, but like majority of your clients would be a representation of this, but with that, yeah, 100%. So cool. So you're going to have to niche down to make that person feel seen, whoever that person is. And the way that you do that, as I talk about in the book, it's this idea of audience of one. If you want to reach the masses, you've got to speak to one person. I mean, it's crazy. Like the amount of times on my newsletter, I've had people emailing back saying, oh my God, this is exactly what I was thinking. This is exactly what I'm going through. And the reason being is that I have one person in mind. One of my favorite clients who I worked with, who I would wish I could clone her. She's awesome. And when I write a newsletter, when I wrote my book, I was writing it to her.
That's powerful. I think that's what they say also with public speaking.
Yeah.
That you're always talking to one person instead of the whole room of 1,000.
Yeah. I mean, public speaking is like a whole other ball game, right? But I think again, it's when you write your talk, when you craft your message that you want to share on stage or on a panel or on a podcast, you've just got to think about who is it that I would love to be able to reach? Like if I could get a room full of 10, 100 or 1,000 people, my ideal people, who would they be? And then you got to think about what are they going through? What are the challenges, struggles, dreams, fears that they are saying to themselves? And when you really truly understand the pain points of your customers and the challenge they go through, then you can talk in your social media posts, in your marketing, your sales calls, all this stuff becomes much easier because you start collecting data as to how they describe their problems. What's it costing them? What have they tried? Why has it failed? What do they wish existed? What would it be like if they could solve it? And then you give them a plan of how to do it.
Very, very, very powerful. That just made me think of an analogy, how they say, if you like everything, you don't like anything. So this is kind of the same, saying, I want to help everyone. You kind of preclude yourself from being able to work with that ideal customer. So
it's also really hard to recommend. So I'll give you an example. I've had a few people ask me like, oh, because they've seen me talk at different companies or conferences, like, oh, I'd love to get in the circuit. Like, and I'll just say, like, cool. So just as a test, I said, tell me what you talk about. And they'll just say something really broad, but I can't recommend anyone like that. Like the people I recommend are A, people I trust, but B, they've got a very specific
field of expertise.
Well, for example, Vanessa Bello, right? I think about, she's awesome. She's the founder of High 15. She's a diversity, inclusion, and belonging expert who's worked with like LVMH, Disney, Gymshark, and so forth. She does something very specific. She solves a very specific problem. She talks about a very important topic. So it's easy for me we're going to a conference and someone says, do you know any other speakers? And I said, well, are you thinking about bringing someone? I've got someone, right? Specificity breeds recommendations.
Because that also gives you a much more narrow lane to actually grow in and potentially become number one.
Yeah. And it's also like, it sounds silly, but like if I come across a resource, an opportunity, I know instantly who I'm thinking of. So, like for example, my friend Thomas Olivier, the founder of Omnos. And if I see something about genetics or health optimization or anything like that, I'm like, oh, Thomas. If I see something about women's sexuality and sexual pleasure and demystifying taboos about the pleasure gap, I'll think about Billy Quinlan, the founder of Furley and CEO, co-founder of Furley and CEO, who I had the pleasure of working with. So it just becomes easy to kind of recommend. If you're a generalist, I'll say the last thing about this because, I can get on for too long, but if you run and you got a knee injury, who do you want to go and see? Like a GP or like a knee expert, right? 9 times out of 10, you'll go for someone who's like a specialist in knees versus someone who sees everyone between having a cold, the flu, the COVID, or having a bad ankle. And it's the same thing with you. If you don't position yourself as a certain expert in a certain particular topic, you're not going to inspire confidence in someone who's looking for a specific problem to be solved. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. I guess the only exception to the rule is for the people that don't know. So they don't know what injury they have. They don't know exactly what they want.
Yeah, there you go.
They just want some inspiration. So they go to some inspiring figure to get inspiration.
Yeah, and sometimes you just got to start somewhere.
Yeah. So I just want to close down kind of the purpose topic. So you said that you were speaking in a lot of companies for them. Why do you think it's so important to define your purpose? And what happens if we don't?
Wow. Okay. So the shortest version, I can answer that question. So, okay, here it is. So in my TEDx talk that I gave in 2017, I kind of talked about how one of the reasons why most people were drawn to this concept of entrepreneurship, despite the epic proportion of failure and the correlation with mental health issues, was that actually what people were looking for was a sense of meaning and purpose beyond themselves and being part of an important mission that they felt compelled to be part of. But being an entrepreneur is only one thing. That you can do that working in academia, you can do that working in a company, you can work that by volunteering. Like there's different ways you can express and reach that fulfillment if you want. So that was like one thing. So I think on a deeper level, it's one of like our core foundations as human beings that we need to have something that is meaningful beyond ourselves. The way that I sometimes explain it to people is it's just finding a reason as to why this matters and why I should do this. So even with my kids, right? So I'll see my kids. The difference between if I tell my kids we're just going to walk to school and they're kind of moaning, they don't want to walk and it's annoying, versus I say we're going to play a game. And the game is we're going to have letters and numbers who are going to chase us. And randomly, we don't know which number of letters is going to chase us, but we'll turn around and we'll have to shout out what number we see. And then we sprint for a little bit and then they pretend to put them in prison and then we continue. But that journey goes by so much like so quicker, right? Because we've given it a reason to play. We've added something that matters to it. So I think individuals, organizations, and teams who lack a common sense of purpose or a clear common vision at some point end up struggling. Like that's what I found, that what carries us forward and endures a lot of adversity is being able to dream up of a future worth striving for. And so if you have the ability to paint a picture of what a different future could be, and I say this, so this is the new book I'm writing at the moment, but it's like almost like you have to be willing to do work that you will see no end of. Right? Like I call it build your cathedral, not because of a religious purpose, whatever you're into, mosque, synagogue.
You're talking about legacy.
Yeah. So I remember as a kid walking around Barcelona, I think it was. Sagrada Familia, I was there and it was being still renovated, I think still to this day, right? And I remember my mom explaining to me about this infrastructure and how the architect of it never knew that he would never see the end of the project, and how it was actually quite common in this era, even like medieval cathedrals and all this kind of Gothic cathedral, that they knew when they took on the project that they would never see it. But they still were so excited about it. They still poured themselves into it. And I thought there was something really interesting from a concept from like, how can you then apply that into companies and leaders? If there's a great quote, I forgot who said it, but it's like, do not be afraid of the work that has no end. And the last part, just to kind of keep it really short, I would say is we all need and want to be part of an exciting story. We all want to feel like we're on an important and exciting journey, right? So when you're in an organization that has a really clear purpose beyond, and I often challenge when I used to go to companies and they'd bring me in and I'd have a chat with the CEO and the founding and the executive team and all this stuff before my intervention. I'd be like, so what's your purpose, right? And I'd sometimes do this individually or in a group setting. And we want to be the number one in our industry. Why? I don't know what the swearing policy on the podcast is, but it's like who gives a shit, right? Why? Like literally, you're the only person who's gonna be interested in being number one. So what, from an ego perspective, so that you can look at shareholder value and say like, we are the number one with.
That's not a goal that you can share with somebody
not an
that
exciting
they're
story.
going to get behind.
It's not an exciting story. Being number one is not an exciting story. However, you could twist it and turn it by saying who we need to become in order to become a number one. That's what might be exciting, because it's almost like how to become a championship contending team. It's not just winning the Super Bowl, right? Like winning the Super Bowl could be a goal in itself. We want to be but it's actually how are we going to show up when we don't want to train, when we're feeling down. What's the journey that's going to take us to get to the top of the mountain? Because you can get to the top of the mountain and realize you've lost half your women and men up the hill, right? So what's the point of that? So it's really this idea of finding something that feels genuine, that is congruent to your core values as an individual, as a leader, as an organization. And then to finding a way to remind yourself of it, because you can do a workshop with someone and come up with like this really lovely kind of, our purpose is to eradicate career misery in the workplace. But you forget what that means, or you kind of lose track of it. But every once in a while, you're going to sit back down and go, this is our North Star. Like this is why we put up with all this. But you can't have, I'll say this, you can't have a compelling purpose without a clear set of core values or guiding principles, sometimes people call them. Because a purpose gives you like a raison d'etre and like a kind of a reason for being in your why, and it gives you that kind of North Star, almost that lighthouse. But along the way, you're going to have to make decisions on how you hire, how you fire, how you bring on suppliers, how you work with clients. And a lot of the times you need a set of guiding principles or values, if you want, that are going to dictate whether you say yes or no. Right? Like,
and how you do things.
And how you do things. But culture is how we do things around here. That's it. Like, if you had to really boil down what's a culture, it's like how we do things around here. So I often say when I used to go to companies and they'd bring me in and they'd tell me like, we've got a really great culture, Mark, and it's really thriving. And, and they'd have like these great values written on the wall, like authenticity and transparency and all these great things. We've got a fruit bowl, it's like, wow, really like new age. And I would say to them, I said, that's great, but
how do you execute?
No, not even that. I'm going to judge you on 3 different places when I'm going to visit your office. And they're going to tell me more about your culture than anything else that you can throw at me. And that's your kitchen, your boardroom, and your bathroom, because those are your communal spaces. The way that people treat the space is a reflection of how they treat each other and how they respect the place they work. So that tells me more about culture than any kind of brochure they could give me.
Notes taken. You mentioned your talk, and in that talk, you did indeed touch upon several points that I want to discuss. So one of them is where you made the point of there is no need to quit your job in order to find the meaning and purpose. So that really resonated with me, because looking back from my own past, I've quit perfectly great position from amazing companies because I was lacking that deeper sense of purpose. So I feel like we have this tendency as humans to become disenamored with different jobs, different relationships, even hobbies. After a while, if there is no that spice that you mentioned of life, that variety, or we don't maybe set ourselves new challenging goals along the way, and it just becomes easier to chuck it in a bin altogether. Reset. Rather than exactly to look at that big picture, look at where the thread was lost, look where to start rebuilding or what needs tweaking. We just think, okay, well, I'm not feeling fulfilled. Bye.
Yeah.
So
it's your fault.
Yeah.
And that's often what happens.
It's the job's fault.
It's your fault. It's you're not. Yeah. And I think what you speak to is very relevant. And again, that was like my first book started as a joke because I wrote a blog post whereby I was in a job and I was looking for a different kind of job. And I would have to sneak out in the corridor to take on phone calls for like job interviews. I would take on fake holidays, but actually I would go to Paris for job interviews. And I felt like I was having an affair on my workplace, right? I felt like me trying to look for a new job while still being employed was like me trying to look for a new girlfriend while I was still in a relationship. And I kind of blogged about this as a bit of a joke, and it got a really good reaction. People kind of laughed. I was kind of sharing like a few anecdotes. That became a book, It's Not You, It's Me, which was this kind of thing about, like the relationship when you break up with someone and you kind of go, it's not you, it's me. I just, I've changed, I've moved on. And that's what happens with the book. But what I've learned from my experience, having worked with a bunch of people when I used to be more of a life coach back in the day, is that just like in relationships, if you don't address the issue at the heart of your discomfort, it will show up again and again and again and again, right? Like you'll somehow attract the same partners. You'll somehow end up in the same situation at work. Like, how am I here again? And in the victim mindset, you might start going like, it's not fair. Why is this happening to me? Et cetera, et cetera. Whereas what I always say is like, it's not about staying in a relationship, whether that's at work or in a romantic relationship at all costs for the sake of it. But know that, and of course, if you're in an abusive, toxic relationship, it's a completely different story and a different matter. But shy of that, I think there's an opportunity to stay with the discomfort and really be honest with like, what is the part of responsibility that I'm willing to take that's co-created this situation? So I'll give an example. I can, it's so interesting now, with a few years added to my belt, a bit more experience, a bit more kind of awareness in terms of conversation with different people, leaders, companies, organizations, that I can honestly hand to heart say that I was stuck in a lot of victim mindset when I was an employee, and I blamed a lot my employers, and I blamed a lot of the situations for me not feeling a certain way. Whereas if I take an honest lens and apply it to the situation, I would find that I lacked the courage and the conviction to express my discomfort, to explore what my needs were, and to have an open dialogue and conversation about what could potentially be done to fix it before quitting, right? Same thing with relationships. I've self-sabotaged relationships in the past, right? Instead of like addressing the core issue. So I think it's an important note, which I think you bring, which is sometimes we can blame our employer, we can blame our colleagues, we can blame, like, and I'm not saying no one's not to blame, like everyone holds a bear of responsibility in co-creating situations, but I think you'd be much better off to kind of really honestly go, look, I can quit if I want to, but before I quit, let me try and see if I can fix it. So I'll give you a very concrete example of this. I remember speaking with a friend, and he was basically about to resign from his job. I think he was more like an admin assistant kind of job, I think, in this particular organization. And he's like, I'm really bored. I'm not being stimulated. I want to do something more creative. So I'm going to quit and I'm going to join like a social media manager position somewhere else. And I remember going like, so did you tell them that? He was like, no, but there's no point because there's no progression in the company anyway. It's just the unspoken system. Also the assumptions, right? The assumption of the unspoken system. And I remember saying, so if you're telling me, if your employer said, look, this may not be your core job at the moment, but we know it's important to you, maybe you could spend like half a day a week learning this particular skill set, and the rest of the time you focus on this other stuff, like, would that be something you'd be willing to take on? You'd be like, yeah, 100%. And I was like, so how do you want them to be mind readers?
Facts.
Like,
same as relationships.
Yeah. Right. So it's kind of like it's really difficult for the other person to know what you're truly going through and feeling if you don't let them in on it. And I know it sounds obvious, but how many times have you been in a relationship or been in relationships
We're not trained to be in discomfort. We're not trained to endure and even less initiate these uncomfortable situations.
Yeah.
That is the problem.
Yeah. And it's because, and we can get as deep as you want to here, but the fundamental issue that I've found, having worked with, successful on paper CEOs and founders of companies, is, am I lovable? And do I love myself? Am I enough? Those three fundamental questions will drive pretty much any behavior you do, whether that's striving for more, trying to prove everyone wrong, having a chip on your shoulder, but also avoiding conflict or difficult conversations. Like I'm not a pro at that, right? Like my partner used to run the school of conflict. She is like the queen of conflict. Like she used to, because she's kind of stopped the business. But some people are naturally more inclined to either enjoy those kind of conversations or very comfortable. Most of us aren't. And it's conditioned from a really young age. It's one of the reasons why we find sales icky. And we find people like interrupting people's lives really difficult to call and say, hey, I know you filled out my form. Is this a good time to chat? Because when we were children and we're talking, the parents will say, stop, and we're talking, don't interrupt. So from the script of a young child, you learn that it's rude to interrupt people in their day. So then you carry that on when you're trying to build your business, right? So just these little things that we can sort of learn and unpack. So there's great tools out there. You can look at non-violent communication techniques, which is like how to approach a difficult conversation in a safe, structured way, where you kind of state the action without having any feelings attached to it. And then you say how it makes you feel, what your wish is. And there's different ways of going about it. But I just feel that people going, oh, my job is so boring and I'm not having any meaning. It's like, cool. So before you go, what can you do about it to try and create it here and now and then? Because if you can't, you're going to find yourself 6 months, 2 years down the line in the same situation.
Absolutely. And this is where I also wanted to add that this is one scenario that you've described. In my experience, I've had these moments where, okay, it's a great job. There's nothing wrong with it. It's great. And I'm great at it and everything's nice. However, again, that deeper thought of that sensation that, okay, this is not what really I was born to do. So I feel like I am wasting my potential. And I know that's a bit of a kind of phrase that goes around there, right? But the sensation is very clear. But then you kind of fall into that temptation of, okay, let me drop this and let me go and find out something new and exciting to do that might be it, etc. So in hindsight, learning from my own mistakes, like if anyone kind of finds themselves in that situation, I would say, stay where you are, keep your job, and try, like, imagine that you already quit. Then what would you do then? And do that whilst you're in the job. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because otherwise we just kind of fool ourselves with this new, exciting, incredible future. But then, when you get there, then the reality hits and everything else. So you can just test that whilst you're still in the job. So you take less risks, I guess, and you really test your actual will and desire to do those things.
Yeah, you've got to see it like, there's that old saying, like, what got you here won't get you there. And it's the same thing in relationships. You know, if
The grass is not greener.
well, it's, you know, I mean, sometimes it can be, who knows, but at least what I've come to see in my own relationship, you know, when you're with someone after a certain while, like there are things you can, it's like a fire. If you don't attend to your fire, it's going to burn out. And so whether that's your career, whether that's your health, whether that's your relationship, your finances, whatever, you've got to remember, like, are you caring and paying attention to your fire? And are you keeping it alive? Whether that's, it needs a bit of oxygen, it needs a bit, that might be space, you know, between, you know, is it need a bit of fire? That might be more intimacy, like connection, whatever it is. And it's the same thing. Like I always joke about this, that there are so many parallels between intimate personal relationships and our work. And again, that was like the first book, right? And it's this idea that it is, I wonder there's something along the lines of like, how different would you show up if the responsibility of finding fulfillment and meaning in your work was on your shoulders, not your employer's shoulders? Just play with me for a second. Imagine that was the way it was going to play out. How differently would you show up, and what would you say, do, act differently? You know, well, what would that give you permission to say or do? If it was up to you, and you
the
could
thing
change
is,
things.
it is.
And it is. Yeah, right. But for people who might not be ready to take that on, just pretend like, what if there was a, you know, role play situation and the fulfillment and meaning of your relationship was on your shoulders at work or even in your relationship? What would you do differently?
You know, I love that you draw this parallel between work and relationships. I just had a chat with a friend of mine, and he was saying, he was basically expressing this this experience that a lot of, let's put it that, successful and affluent, say, businessmen or entrepreneurs have, which is maybe they find themselves in their late 30s, early 40s, very great success, you know, financially, in their businesses, career-wise, but they don't have relationship, no fulfilling relationships, no spouse, no partner, not anything. And what I said was, I think from what I've observed as well, is that oftentimes these men have put so much, they've invested so much in their careers, so much in their work. They have effectively not taken that sort of vision of investing equally amounts of time, energy, and thought into a romantic relationship. But because they have done all the work with that and have achieved success there, they kind of expect, you know, the ideal partner to just drop from the sky, appreciating what they've done in the other field where they've basically dedicated their whole life to. But it doesn't quite work like that, does it? Right? So you can always, you know, have somebody that is just there for you for the money, but that's not really what you want, right? You want somebody that's there for you, but for them to even see who you are and to appreciate you for who you are, you have to show who you are.
Yeah, and look, I was quite fortunate that one of my first jobs ended up working at INSEAD. It's like a global business school, and it happens to be in my hometown. And when I was coming back from 2009, I went through a bit of a bad period. I ended up getting a job there, so I worked and was exposed to like some really interesting professors, and I discovered social entrepreneurship, this concept that you could use business principles to foster social transformation. I was just like, oh my God, that's amazing. And I remember just speaking to a bunch of executives, because my role was to effectively help run these executive education programs. So I'd hang out with a lot of participants who were often kind of C-suite executives and CFOs, CEOs, etc. And we would just have these candid conversations, right? Like over like a canapé or like over dinner or whatever it was. And something struck me pretty early on. And I was pretty young at the time. And they kind of would open up sometimes and say like, I kind of got it wrong. And I'd be like, what do you mean? Like, they were on their second marriage. Some of them were like on their second marriage. They had the second or third holiday house. They put their kids through private education and all this stuff, and they'd achieved this quote unquote financial success, but they didn't know their kids. Like their kids didn't speak to them because their wife had left them. And I just remember going like, this is nuts. Like, these are some of the most, again, quote unquote, successful people, in the business world. And a lot of them I spoke to were struggling with some form of fulfillment in that domain. And I had a chat with my friend about this the other day, which is how to redefine what success means to me or to you, to us, that I can be stuck into old patterns. So for example, right now, I would say I am time rich. Not necessarily cash rich, but I'm time rich. And it's really difficult to assign the proper value to it compared to if I worked in the corporate world right now, or if I got a steady job and I would have, a different type of salary. But there is something that comes with the freedom of being able to manage my own time and work with certain clients and get to travel and give talks. Like I'm going to give a talk in April in America. And it's hard. It's really hard for someone to wake up listening to this and realizing that maybe they got up that ladder, but they're on the wrong wall. It's really tough because you kind of go, why did I do this? Because maybe my parents said I should do this. Maybe society, I bought what society told me I should do. And that, I've got a lot of compassion for people going through that, because I think a lot of us have in this kind of space have kind of gone through that difficult challenge at some point. But I think it's also a healthy question to ask.
Definitely. And I think we're also given these all sorts of wrong images about what things are. So in your talk, you also spoke about this entrepreneurial limelight, right? So this 21st century superstar. And that's so true, Now you look and every other person has the Forbes 30 and the 30, then they have this accolade and then they have that award. And then, the most revered people are the richest people on earth, which are all entrepreneurs. So everyone's going after that, thinking that, okay, great, gonna be on my laptop sipping mojitos and tanning on beaches, amazing supercars and all that. But it's literally the opposite. It is the most kind of anxious, lonely, scary journey that you can take. So we're literally sold a lie. Like I feel like all the failed...
Tears is what I said, because tears don't sell.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the talk, and yeah, it's 100%.
And I feel like if all of the failed entrepreneurs came together and they filed a lawsuit, that would be the biggest lawsuit for whoever's marketing it that way.
Yeah.
Who are these people pulling these strings and putting out these images in our heads?
Yeah, I mean,
biggest lawsuit
and look,
on earth.
It's for some people it's not the same journey. Like some people do manage to find kind of a groove and enjoy that process and are built for it. But I think I think at least that's what I felt the need to give my TEDx talk was. I felt like there was a need for like a counter argument to the kind of the prolific message being portrayed as being an entrepreneur as the ultimate gateway to freedom, happiness, success, and all the accolades you can think of in the world. And it's a bit like saying that everyone should do an Ironman, right? It's a bit like,
well, the more you hear about it, the more people will want to do it.
Yeah. And so it's like, pictures of people who've just completed an Ironman and, they're ripped or whatever. Because what you're really chasing is a feeling, if you think about it, right? So if you ask someone like, what do you want to be? I want to be famous. Why? Really, and you keep on asking that question 6, 7, 8, 9 times, what you'll get to is like, so that I feel like I'm enough, right? So that I can be seen and finally heard and understood and loved. And like, that's what it's going to be. If you ask someone, why do you want to be rich? It's because they think they're going to feel a certain way. But the truth is, and I can say this and everybody can understand this from an intellectual perspective, viscerally is a completely different matter. All these things, and I know this because I am that guy and I've been on that journey. Like I will put up a goal, right? I want to give a TEDx talk, or I want my TEDx talk to hit 1 million views, or I want to get a traditional publishing deal with like a major publisher in the world. Like keep going the list, right? I think I'm going to feel different when I get there. No, I won't, and I don't. It passes. Like, when my book launched on launch day, we managed to hit top 3 in 3 different categories on Amazon. Top 10 in 3 different categories on Amazon. That was it. I mean, literally like 10 minutes later, I was like, oh, got bestseller launch day. Great. And then you go to the next thing and the next thing. And it's relentless. It is relentless. And some of the most content, leaders I've come across are people who kind of really understand the idea that there's this place that you can reach, which is, I want to better myself, but not coming from a place of shame, of guilt, of judgment, of I'm not enough, but rather for the betterment, but not at the cost of relationships. And I have no false pretense that I have to wait until this achievement happens for me to feel the way I want to. Yeah, I think it's Danielle Laporte, she came on my podcast. She's really cool. She wrote a book, I think, called The Value Map. Does that ring a bell? And I think that the whole premise of the book is basically we put up all these, think about your New Year's resolutions. If I ask you, like, what are your 10 top New Year's resolutions, top 5, whatever it is, you write them down, right? I want to get in the best shape of my life. I want to make like $1 million, whatever. And effectively
Classics.
It's like, yeah, and try to go to Japan. And but you'll say like, what are you hoping to feel if you get that? So then you you discover what
And
that,
you can get that feeling
There you
every
go.
day if you want.
Oh, there you go. So, I don't know, man, like, okay, I want to imagine me. I'll be like, oh, I'd love to be invited on, I don't know, X podcast, right? I can't think of anyone right now, and you'd be like, why? I'm like, because I'm going to get loads of people to hear my message. And like, okay, but why? Why does that matter? Because I can help more people. And I can go through these layers, and ultimately it'll be like, so I feel like I'm enough. But actually,
and that is something that you can give yourself
there
any
you go.
day of the week. Yeah.
Right. And no one else is going to, but here's the mad thing, is that the thing we seek the most in validation from others cannot be given by anybody else but ourselves.
Amen.
But that's what's nuts about this whole, if you think about, I don't know if there are gods or if there's a universe of some sort looking down on us, but if there are, they must be laughing like their heads are, because like, look at these humans. This is hilarious.
Trying to get it outside when it's there all along.
Yeah. It's a bit like The Alchemist, right?
Yeah.
Paul Coelho's Alchemist. It's that. It's this crazy journey of chasing our tails. No, worse, chasing other people to tell us what a tail should look like, or tell us when our tails is going to be enough.
It's great that this image just popped into my mind. It's like you looking like a beggar, trying to go to everyone to give you a diamond or whatever, it's a piece of bread, when that diamond or whatever is literally within you, and you're blindly just begging all around. Yeah,
and it's hard. Like, I'm saying this as if it's like, it is hard to come to a place of full acceptance of being okay with who you are, which is part of the mission with the book, to help people come home to their stories and to heal their wounds and to really understand that their warts and fears and shameful and all this kind of stuff actually makes them human. We've all got some level. Obviously, not all of us have gone through some form of massive trauma or small t or big capital T trauma. But I do think that it's part of the puzzle. It's part of the process. Like, coming home to your story is part of that element of, actually, I'm not going to get validation from others because I first need to seek it for myself. But what would that mean about me if I say I'm enough? What kind of, that's the work, ultimately.
And I like what you mentioned about kind of setting goals. I think oftentimes we focus on these, they're not even arbitrary, like they're rooted somewhere, right? These goals that we want to achieve. But if we think about it and we put them into perspective, it's always related to something external. I want to, be number one podcast because I've seen that person be number one podcast and they have such an amazing life, etc., etc., etc. Whereas the way I like to think about my life is I always try to focus on the way I want to be rather than maybe specific things I want to do or achieve, etc. Because I know, like, I've seen this in my life. As you say, it's a fleeting moment. For 1 second, you're like, oh, great. Yeah. Gone. And
but it happens
every time.
Every time. When my podcast won like the best podcast interview award, I was just like, amazing. And then 24 hours later, I was like, I think I'm going to stop my podcast. It's I think it's Jim Carrey who said this. I'm going to paraphrase, I'm going to butcher it, but something on the lines like, I wish everybody could be rich and famous so they could understand it's not the answer to all their problems.
And this is also a good point, which is, I think you have to go through that. I think you have to achieve some level of success and some level of financial security to then see it really in practicality for yourself. Well, that's not where it's at. Because otherwise, you can tell that to people. Yeah. They're not going to believe you. Yeah. They're like, easy for you to say.
Yeah, exactly.
Get out of my face.
I agree. It is tough.
So it's almost, in theory, it's always within us, but we have to go these rounds in the world, have this friction with other people, go through these experiences to then be able to unlock that internal diamond.
Yeah, I think it's the essence of Buddhism and a lot of this kind of deeper work around how do we accept ourselves. Who said that? There's something like, most of the world's misery can be down to like men not taking the time to sit down in quiet and silence, or something being there's like some famous quote like that. It's one of the reasons why we overconsume content, which is ironic because we're saying this on a podcast, right? But really, I'm like that. My intention for 2023 was cultivating presence. Like, I have an intention I don't do New Year's resolutions, I do intentions. And this year it's cultivating presence. So what does that mean? It means that at any given moment or time, if I have an option to take my phone out or to listen to a podcast, listen to music, make a phone call, I don't, to the best of my ability. And I just sit with my own thoughts, my own feelings, and see what am I avoiding, right? By grabbing my phone, by trying to find a distraction. Like, what is it that I'm running away from? Like, what is the feeling, the emotion, the thought that I can't be with, I don't want to be with, whether consciously or unconsciously, that I get to minimize by using my phone, a phone conversation, whatever it is, which I can justify, right? Like I'm going to go for a workout, I'm going to do the dishes, like something.
Yeah, we're so stuck in this multitasking. I want to maximize my time. I want to wash the dishes and listen to a podcast and learn an audiobook.
I want to watch Netflix, all this stuff. And you know, my partner's always she used to say this joke, like, God forbid you'd wash the dishes without listening to a podcast. But it's true. Like, and I can see how it's kept my mind so busy.
Busy is easy.
Yeah, it is. And to loop back to the purpose conversation we had, Aubrey Marcus said this best. He said, your purpose doesn't shout at you, it whispers. And so even Rich Roll, when he did his course on mind, body, green, whatever it's called, I forgot what it's called now. Mind, green, body. Anyway, he did a course on like how to find your purpose. Like the first premise of the workshop, the course was like, you've got to sit down in silence twice a day for 20 minutes for like 30 days. Then you come back to this course.
Hi there. I hope you're enjoying this episode. You can listen to the full audio version for free on your favorite podcast app. And if you are enjoying this video version, I invite you to join my exclusive Patreon community to support the making of the show and to unlock a ton of exclusive content, such as the full video episodes, bloopers, some controversial topics, and more personal questions from the guests, and much more. Link is in the description below.